Johanna Tzanidaki. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer in ERTICO ITS Europe, and we are a stakeholders association or public-private partnership of ITS stakeholders that promote the benefits of ITS and work together on innovation in ITS. We we had actually this discussion on the topic of ITS stories from Ukraine at our ITS Congress that we organized back in May in Lisbon, and at the special intersession. And we decided that this is a very powerful and important discussion that merits really more visibility, and that's why we're organizing this webinar. So let me thank you already for participating, for also the panelists for coming to share with us their stories of ITS in the war of Ukraine and other disasters, natural or unnatural. So what I wanted to say already is that we are talking about safety in ITS usually, and we think of speed limits and traffic incidents, but we are when we are talking about the war in Ukraine and now and how ITS has served as a tool to save lives, that is another story where safety means survival from missiles that are flying over your head. So the discussion is going to also have elements or points where we are discussing the natural disasters, flooding or fires, wildfires, or even earthquakes. And actually 4 days ago in my country, I'm from Greece, we had an incident like this, It was a really a huge rainfall that cost lives of citizens that we didn't have a way to evacuate. And we're going to be talking about evacuation routes. We are going to be talking about maps and intelligent transport serving the need to protect the citizens and ensure that they remain alive and safe. Let me already pass the floor to my fellow co-moderator or colleague from ARMIS ITS, Pedro Barradas. He is the Chief Strategy Officer, and he was also in his role as President of ITS Portugal, hosting the Congress, the ITS Congress that we held in Lisbon back in May when this discussion was first held. So without further ado, Pedro, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
For attending. For me, it's really a privilege to take 5 minutes to open the discussion and following up on the Congress. So let me quickly just go and share my my presentation, and it's an opening or setting the scene and a reflection on how uncertainty is part of our lives, and also in the scope of traffic management is something that we as a community need to face as a challenge. And a few examples of these recent years, and Joanna has pointed out a few days or weeks ago, but over the last few years, we've seen what were the effects of the pandemic, the COVID-19 and the lockdowns. Also the reflections of what after that people and the cities were doing to claim back a little bit of public space for pedestrians, for bikes, for different usabilities of the public space, which requires flexibility and adaptation of the physical infrastructure and to be supported by the digital infrastructure as well. We are seeing a big challenging now in nowadays, and it's going to go to be a very difficult topic to cope with from the traffic management point of view, also with the fight against the emissions. So repurposing mobility for climate change. And we're seeing more and more cities coming up and putting up their plans for urban vehicle access regulations, for implementing low emission zones. So a different kind of lockdown, nevertheless, a dynamic use of public infrastructure and space to different needs, to different purposes, and a race to clean fuels and alternative fuels that can prevent us from or keep helping freight and movement of people and goods across the world to be met, but with different targets of emissions. Moving forward, and another two examples of what we've seen recently in Morocco and last year in Turkey, the earthquakes, and how those impacted the lives of millions of people, still are. And this is something that can take place again, unfortunately. So traffic management needs also to take into account this risk assessment, the traffic management plans for the crisis scenarios, the identification of critical corridors and implementing governance structures to put in place when this come to happen in a coordinated and effective way for the emergency responses to come to the scene and save people. And also the big challenges we see also in Ukraine that brings us also here today. The war at our doorsteps in Europe, still in the 21st century. Almost hard to believe it's happening still. Nevertheless, it's affecting millions of lives, and also traffic management plays a role there, bringing them to safety, bringing them to other locations, making sure that that the freight for delivering food and the value and the service chains are not completely disrupted, so that they can still provide services and access to goods and survival medical equipments that are required to end up in those regions to help people there. So from a traffic management point of view outlook, and I'm just finishing my setting the scene, we will be looking at requirements for redundancy. We will need to put in place backup plans for making sure that the infrastructure is up and running, so that we prevent disruptions of services when communications or power electrification are down. We will need to take that into account. We will also see that the infrastructure will need to quickly adapt to dynamic conditions. So flexibility is something that we as a community also need to put into the picture and take into account. Also the robustness, resilient transport systems need to be subject to maybe stress plans and stress tests, as the financial sector have been with the financial crisis. I think all of these dynamic changes need to be seen as a simulation or opportunities to simulate what the impacts of these extreme conditions and scenarios can bring to the movement of people and goods in those regions. And again, the information sharing mechanisms, the technology to make sure that everyone is informed and aligned and coordinated also needs to come into account, finding alternative routes for those who need it and provide accurate information to safety. So we will need to adapt because, you know, sometimes life just happens, and as a community, I think we need to take the chance to rethink mobility. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Pedro. Thank you for setting the scene. Indeed, robustness, flexibility, redundancy, and information sharing. And this is what intelligence should be in our transport system and our society at the end of the world of the day. Thank you, Pedro, again. And I will pass the floor to Oleg Polovinko, who is advisor to the mayor on digitalization from the city of Kiev. Oleg, last time I was moderating this discussion, I had two feelings. I became emotional and also very, very proud about working in the ITS sector. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Hello to everyone. Thank you for having us, and of course, thank you for support of Ukraine in war time. I will share with you our story, how ITS plays the main role in communication with the citizens in the Kiev. Let's start the presentation from next. Yeah, and next slide, please. Yeah, here is my previous position, Chief Information Officer. I'm already finished this position, and now I'm Mayor Advisor of Digital Strategy Projects, and ITS one of them. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, the story have to begin from period before the war, because we in Kiev we was increasing the number of the vehicles, and that was quite challengeable for us, because every year we expanded the numbers, and our roads and our traffic was not ready for such numbers of the vehicle, and that was the challenge, how to manage our traffic and public transportation. Here you see the numbers, and the population of Kiev here is a registered population, but real population with agglomeration who visited every day the city was more than 3.5 million, and the capacity of the roads was 5,100, 6,100. That was it's comfortable for that what we have, but the numbers is doubled, and that was the main challenge for the city. Next slide, please. When we developed our strategy for transportation system, we understand that our main goal is only the public transport. We cannot increase the numbers of the road in the city. That's why our main challenge was how to make the public transport popular and comfortable for our citizens. Next slide, please. We started the journey from automation of fare collection systems and providing comfortable system for our citizens, which started from electronic ticket, and every year we increased the numbers of the services. So we implemented the payment with a banking card. We implemented QR tickets, one-time QR tickets. Already we even go forward, and we launched the virtual ticketing card, which helps us to cancel the plastic cards. And we have two main operators of our transportation. First one, it's Metropolitan, and the second one is Kiev Bus Trans. It's the company who operates the public transport, like the trolley buses, and trams. Next slide, please. Of course, the Black Swan, how we call them, the 24th of February 2022, the full-scale invasion of the Russia, it's changed the rules and faced us the new challenges, and transportation sector have to be ready for that. As Pedro mentioned before, we tested our system and for backups, because before the invasion in January, we already received a lot of signals from our cybersecurity center, because our system was under attack, and Russians trying to take it down, and the transportation system was part of our critical infrastructure. So we faced these challenges even before the full-scale invasion. After that, next slide, please. Yeah. That brings to us a number of new challenges. It started from the increasing the prices for the fuel, and this has changed the tariffication of spending, what we receive as a city. There was reduction of the number of the passengers, disruption of the logistic links. We facing that, for example, the metropolitan becomes the bomb shelters for our citizens, and in this period, the metro cannot function and cannot deliver our citizens where they need. And in the moment of the air attack, and when the city under the missile attack, we stopping our transportation for the security reason. And all this changes the management of the system, and we always was focusing on that, how to manage it when the missile attack is finishing. So all these challenges focusing us on that first our value is our citizens and their security, and all these challenges of attack focusing us on that we have to communicate to our citizens. Next slide, please. In this moment, we communicated through our main transportation application, which is now 2.6 million registration. Through this application, this is Kyiv Digital app, we already, before the invasion, we managed electronic ticket and parking in the city. That's helps us to increase the numbers of the users of the application before the invasion almost to 2 million. So that was an excellent platform for our citizens and for city management, how to communicate directly to citizens and provide to them right information in right moment. So firstly, we use them for notification about air attacks. After that, we expanded the quantity of the service in this application. We provided the useful maps because Google closed the editing of the maps for private businesses, and people cannot receive information about availability of the services. That's why we launched the useful maps in our application, in our transportation application, where the citizens receiving information about the pharmacy, car services, food stores, etc., where they can receive services and the goods. And that become the, like we call them, life-saving tool for our citizens. And they provided we provided through this application information about the evacuation roads, about the schedule of the transport when it works, and lifetime visibility of the transportation of the map. In addition, we have the weather information, ecological situation, about the quality of the air, and the information about the radiation level in the city, because the Kyiv city is quite near to a nuclear power station, and our citizens worries about the quality of the air and radiation in the city. So all these services provided through the transportation application. In addition, of course, we have all other parts like the video management systems, which helps to our special forces and militaries to protect our city. And in intellectual traffic lights, it's not in the best level in that moment, but we used it to make the corridors for cars for evacuation. And all this information collected to the dashboards, to the mayor and his deputy who is responsible for that. So that's help them to make right decision based on real data in this moment. Next slide, please. So for us now in all these conditions helps us to rethink about the strategy, what we have about the ITS. We understand from the bottom we understand the value of right infrastructure. We already have the backups and all cybersecurity solutions which help us to be stable and redundancy in this situation. That helps us to be the flexible in providing the services from different channels. And of course, the security reasons in city now on the main goal. So we use the ITS system to make cities safer. And of course, we think about the future. We see the challenges, and the ITS the same as the sandbox for us, where we making the modeling of the future. We see the pain point of our city, by the way, in cooperation with telecom operators. So we don't use only our not use only our data about the traffics. We collect the data from the telecom operators, and in the moment of invasion, the population of the city was decreased less than 1 million registered cell phones in the city. And now it's come back only almost to the numbers before the invasion. So all this data we used to manage the city and provide the services. And for example, how many vehicles we receive from telecom operators, and we compare the data from the video surveillance systems that help us to understand rightly the traffic in the city. And at the same time, we see the population of the city. We understand how many buses we need today on the roads. And you here on the slide, you see all the parts of our ITS, what we use already, and every piece we develop for new functionality. Next slide, please. And of course, in every part of ITS systems, we are open for the partners. We are open for expertise worldwide. We ready to share our experience, what we receive, and our main message that now we are in the war. It's man-made war, and this is not natural disaster, but the challenge is almost the same. If we have the earthquake as we see in Turkey and Morocco, or if we have the flooding or fire forest, all these challenges, they the same, because me as a part of city management, and we in this moment, in moment of some accident, we need direct connection to our citizens. We have to understand where is the crowds, where is our citizens, and for example, what kind of evacuation they need, what kind of help they need. And this is good examples how to use ITS in this moment. because this is a big system, big combination of the systems, and all of them have to be orchestrated well in this moment. Every piece have to understand what to do in this moment, and in final stage we have to provide right information to our citizens, how to be in safety and how to receive help from the city management, because the national levels, they see that accident, they see that they need to provide something, but the city management is that guys who provide direct services to the citizens, and they have to be played in all together and help to our citizens. So my main message in this moment, when we see that the world climate is changing, we understand all together after this summer and after the COVID time, we all together understand that the challenges will be the same. So look at your ITS systems, look at on it through the civil defense lens, and I'm sure that every city can take our experience to them and provide more safety services for the citizens. Thank you.
Yeah, Oleg, thank you very much. Your experience is very valuable for, natural or unnatural disasters, but also man-made, as you said. And we very much appreciate, first of all, you joining the webinar and sharing your experiences with us, and your tenacity in continuing this transport application, providing information, evacuation routes, and using ITS in a very intelligent way. My comment would be, and now I would like to have some very short Q&A of 5 minutes, because the discussion, as I said, is at the end. But the difference between a natural disaster, which we are going to hear, of course, and what is happening with the war in Ukraine, is that you're also facing cyber attacks, right?
Yep.
Because that is part of the war, which is not necessarily something that you're facing when there is a fire, a flooding, and an earthquake. So that is even more, admirable what you're doing there.
Yeah, of course, because now we are not in the classic war as we saw in the history. Yeah, now we have some kind of hybrid war, when our enemy trying to use any kind of channel what they can to do. Of course, they trying to take down our system through the cyber channel. It's not only about ITS, because ITS cannot work without electricity, and they attack the electricity, the power plants, and if they not successful in this way, they launch the missile, and so all together. But the goal is to stop the transportation in the city, because this is the main system. And in our case, we have more points of attack, but the same, it's about your BCP and DRP plans, how to be flexible, how your backups works, and how fastly you can recover your services even after some fall down.
Yeah, thank you, Oleg. Are there any questions that that should be asked now from the participants? Well, you're muted, I'm fully aware, but you can raise your hand and then we can unmute you. Oh, Stephanie, you're not muted.
No, I can't see the Teams page anymore because I'm sharing the slides. But if no one else has got their hand raised, I have a question.
There's no hand raised.
Okay. So for Oleg, just because I know that when we had our session in Lisbon, you mentioned in the session about how the public transport app was repurposed to be a kind of a digital map of the bomb raid shelters. So basically, the public transport metro stations, they just overnight suddenly became the bomb raid shelters. So could you explain a little bit of how you guys did that so quickly? Because I was reading in the media that it was done in less than 24 hours. And then there was this other application that you used for more administrative processes that was also a way for you to communicate with your citizens. I'd love it if you could explain that in a bit more detail.
We was really lucky because in our transportation system we already have the notification module, which help us to provide the information about the changing the roads, about the availability of some buses or something changing in the roads in the city. We used the application to notify citizens, and of course we have the push options where we can provide the pushing information to our users of electronic tickets. That's why in the first day of invasion we very fastly coordinated with our military forces. We provide for them some web tool how to launch the notification in our applications. That's why we was so fast. After that, we expanding this functionality, and we already have of course the register of the bomb shelters in the city from the civil defense guys, and we add it to applications. We have our team who develops the applications, and in this moment they work 20 hours per day and launching new services. So all other our IT team, city management team, it's switched only for this direction, and we expanding, we receiving the requests from our citizens. For example, they don't know where is the evacuation points, how to get out from the city in this moment, and when we receive these requests from the form what they have in our application, we already understand that we need to provide this information. So the citizens and feedback of our citizens help us to understand and prioritize that function, what we need to provide now.
Yeah, it's a perfect orchestration that you were talking about with the pieces of the transport puzzle.
Yeah, and I want to underline one point. It's quite crucial because the strategy of cities before 22 was cooperation with the businesses, and in this case the business owns the application. In our case, we are owner of application. The city Kyiv Council receive from our outsourcing companies, receive existing code, and that's why we have the option fastly make changes and provide new services. That's helps us in this situation.
Yeah, you have full control. Yeah. Okay, Oleg, let's have a discussion at the end of the presentations. Thank you very much again for sharing your experience and what you did in the city of Kiev. I'm going to pass the floor to Georgi Sokolyansky. See, I pronounced it better now than I did in May, and who is Director of Driver Operations in Uber, EMEA. And you are going to share your story of how Uber stepped in and helped in Ukraine. Thank you very much, Georgi. The floor is yours. I don't know if you want us to, yeah, okay, we have the slides, so go ahead. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to try to share my screen. I don't know if it's going to work.
Okay.
Let me
okay, let's try that.
If not, Georgi, I have the same slides from May if you did make any updates.
Okay, Georgi, I hope you're still with us.
Yeah, it's froze for me as well. In the meantime, Johanna, do you want me to play the video that's the first slide of his presentation while he comes back in? Or should we give him a few minutes?
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea.
Okay.
Let's do that. Yeah, Stephanie, thank you.
Let me keep it in this view actually, because I think to play the video, it's a bit easier to grab it. So I'm going to keep my microphone unmuted, and hopefully you should be able to play all this.
Okay. There's no sound though. If there should be sound, there's no sound.
There's no sound.
No.
Okay. Let me see. Hold on, if I can post the link in the chat of the YouTube video, because everyone could just go and watch on YouTube very quickly. Let me.
Ah, Yogi is back. Yogi, can you hear us?
Right, I'm just gonna post in the chat the video.
No, Yogi, we cannot hear you.
Okay, while waiting for Yogi to connect, if you click on the chat, you can see the video on YouTube, which is the same video that's embedded in the presentation.
Okay. Milica, can you make Yogi a presenter, please? Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to share it now.
We have a bit of a hiccup on our intelligence.
Okay, that works. Good audio.
Yeah, it does. Okay, I hope we have managed to make Yogi a presenter. He has access.
I think he's got a problem with his
Yes.
his microphone. What I'm gonna just do while Yogi, if you can hear me, I think it's try leaving the call and rejoining. Maybe it just needs a bit of a refreshment. What I can do in the meantime is hold up on my screen the they had a very nice slide which kind of indicated an overview all the various things that they've done.
Hi guys, I think I'm back now. Am I back?
Yes.
Hooray!
All right, cool. Sorry for that. Nothing ever works when you need it to work the most. Now let me share my screen, and then if that is successful, then I'm golden. Cool. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, sorry for that. Really great to be here. If my very long name did not give me away, I am from Ukraine. I used to be a Ukraine GM for Uber for quite a long time, and still trying to stay very close to what's going on in the country and what we're doing there. The first thing I want to say is good on you for being here. The main fear I have is that Ukraine becomes old news at some point and nobody cares anymore. And we need support, and if there is no interest and all the support is gone, we will not be in a good place. So it's nearly 2 years into the war, and you're here on this call. Means you care. I really wanted to thank you for that. We just had a glimpse of what it was like to be an Uber driver in Kiev this past year. We had Oksana's story, but we have many like that. I think it's tragic in some ways, uplifting in some other ways. There were several moments in my life that shaped my notion of what tech can do in the situations of disaster relief. And I want to share 3 of them briefly, and then also how they shaped our response to the full-scale invasion. So the first moment dates back to 2013. I lived in Donetsk back then, and the separatist takeover started. You had armed militias in the city, and you didn't know where they were. So some parts of town were relatively safe, some were not. The problem is you didn't really know which one was which. And so I remember the feeling of utter confusion. There are places where you shouldn't be, but you don't quite know what they are. And the situation changes so quickly. It's a full-time job to manage risk, and you're really not well positioned to do that if you find yourself in the middle of the situation. And so when the full-scale invasion started, the first question we faced at Uber is, what do we do? Do we shut the service down? Or do we continue operating? And it was a very tough one for us. So safety is one of our core values. We want every Uber trip to be safe, and nothing in Ukraine was truly safe. But at the same time, for us to discontinue service would come almost as a betrayal of our users at the worst possible time. So people who were requesting trips, they were not going to a bar, right? They were evacuating most of the time. And so those were the trips that most needed to happen. But equally on the driver side, when the war starts, a lot of earnings opportunity is gone, and people need money. And so for drivers to be able to continue earning on Uber was quite crucial, and we didn't really want to destroy one of the few economic opportunities they had left at that time. And so we decided to keep the service on. But what that meant for us is we had to really lean into managing risk. What you see here is the map of Kharkiv, my hometown, where 40% of the housing stock was destroyed, the buildings in red. We spent hours upon hours with our security and safety teams on Zoom looking at geofences, essentially trying to block out the parts of towns that we knew were unsafe. We blocked out the military bases, the line of conflict, government buildings, areas that were mined to our knowledge. And so we spent quite a bit of time trying to manage risk the best we could. When airstrikes happened, we had to reroute trips in real time. And we also fed government guidance to our users in real time. And to be clear, you cannot manage risk in a situation like that out of Amsterdam or San Francisco. But what we decided to do is let's rely on our users, local knowledge and situational awareness. But let's also recognize that people in a situation like that don't truly have perfect information. And so let's lean in and have our security controls serve kind of as a fallback, as a guardrail, and then try to realize the best of both worlds, right? You are in a Ukrainian city. You can judge for yourself what is safe, what is not safe, but also you have some protection coming from the fact that risk is managed for you. Not an easy thing, but something that we thought was the right thing to do. Now, the second moment that shaped my notion of what is a need in a situation like that is me trying to get out a family member out of Kiev when the war started into Romania and then to Germany. And so before the war, it was trivially easy to get somebody from Kiev to Bucharest, right? You could take a direct flight, but if you couldn't, for some reasons, there were buses and trains, and you knew exactly what the schedule was. It was trivial. Also, traffic was quite predictable. The moment the war starts, or any disaster, in fact, maybe a natural disaster, your transportation is disrupted, infrastructure is often destroyed, mobility patterns, mobility needs change. And so everything that you knew to rely on in the past is no longer relevant. I also remember, for example, going on booking.com and realizing that it's impossible to book any hotel in Ukraine anymore. And so at Uber, we did a couple of things. So we observed a couple of things and we were reacted in some way. So the first really well-pronounced pattern was you had a mass migration from the east of the country, so places like Donbass or Kharkiv, to the west, to the relative safety of, Lviv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Chernobyl, places to the left on this map. Population in places like Kharkiv halved, and population in some western towns pretty much doubled. And the transportation infrastructure couldn't cope with that. And so the first thing we had to do is essentially to move with the people. So we launched service in 18 new cities in Western Ukraine that were not previously operated. We basically followed our users, riders and drivers. You are able to do it if you're a digital business. We were lucky to be one. If you are kind of an offline service, it's way more difficult to do, unfortunately. The second thing we noticed was new mobility patterns. So one good example of that, it was possible always to take an Uber from the city of Lviv to the Polish border, but it was a minor niche use case. Very few people actually needed it. As people were evacuating to Poland, it became really the main route in Ukraine to the Polish border, to the Romanian border. And none of the infrastructure was built for that. And so we had to kind of improvise and react to that. And the way we did that was by launching a shuttle service from the city center of Lviv to the Polish border. And then also by positioning drivers around that. So what used to be a very kind of low density area, nobody ever needed Uber there, it became a hot spot, and you need to reposition supply essentially to meet the change in demand very quickly. COVID was a bit like that as well, and I think there is one challenge that everybody understands exists, and one challenge which kind of comes as a surprise. So the unsurprising one is operationally you need to change your transportation system. You need to change bus routes, for example. The surprising challenge is discoverability. So back during the COVID lockdown, the city of Kiev changed their bus routes pretty much overnight. That was quite impressive. The problem they were left with is like nobody knew about them because the passengers would rely on their historic knowledge and like written schedules. And so when you change a route overnight, it's great that you did that, but nobody knows about it. And so like as we think about digital transportation system, as we think about apps and web, one major advantage we have is that we can solve the discoverability problem, right? Not only we can change the route, but we can also tell people in real time that it changed. Now, what we also saw was the change in needs. So we think a lot about the evacuation of people, but we also saw an unmet need in the distribution of aid, food aid, first of all. And so we essentially made our tech available to the World Food Programme and the UNHCR to power their logistical system, so their food aid distribution. And then we think a lot about people, but also cultural heritage had to be evacuated. So it's not just people who are under attack, it's also the culture. And so we partnered with the Ukrainian Ministry of Culture to make trips available for conservation and the evacuation of cultural heritage. Again, things like that you are able to do if you are a digital network and if you have tech that you can white label and repurpose quite quickly. So we're lucky to be in that position. I think Oleg's example is a great example of, they had a great transportation app, which became a bomb shelter app. And then the last kind of moment I want to share is also in March last year, my parents' place in Kharkiv got shelled and destroyed in shelling, and I called my dad up kind of 20 minutes after, and I wanted to talk to him really about, his health and is he okay? And he basically survived, by sheer luck, and that was what was on my mind. And like, to my surprise, he didn't really want to talk about his health. He said I was okay. What he wanted to talk about was the money. So he felt the loss of, his property. A large chunk of his, retirement savings was in that property. And so his shock was more to do with how do I fund my life now? And I think if you live in the US or Western Europe, where countries are quite rich and social security is quite rigid or quite reliable, you think less about that. But if you are in a disaster situation, being it in Ukraine, Turkey, Morocco, you name it, you will be surprised by how prominently being able to fund your life and your needs or your evacuation to safety features for people in that situation. And so what we were able to do was to use some of our own budget to fund the relief effort, but equally to tap into the power of our community. We were lucky to have access to millions of people in North America and Europe and really all around the globe, which kind of trusted Uber, trusted our platform, had their credit cards added to profiles already, right? So we had the whole infrastructure that we could use to fundraise with that. And we also wanted to tell, I wanted to tell the Oksana story to you today, but we also wanted to tell it to the whole world to make Ukraine a bit more real. So what you see on the screen right now is Oksana, our driver in Kiev, on a concert hall in Amsterdam, and we were able to fundraise with Uber for Ukraine and then double the money collected. So in summary, what I think we found was crucial to manage risk. Knowing you cannot manage it perfectly, but you can be a useful safeguard to people in the situation. You want to adjust to the changing needs, and you want to stay discoverable, and really helps if you have eyeballs on your app, and you want to tap into the power of the community. That's what we did, and I'm really proud of that.
Well, we're really proud of you and Uber as well. And what is very impressive is what you said in the beginning, where you had to take a decision as Uber. Do you stop the service, or do you continue? And you actually, started the service in the western part of the western cities in Ukraine, where you launched new services. It's your presentation is very emotional, Georgi, also because of the information that you're sharing about your family as well, because that's the thing. We in the audience, I think many of us or most of us are safety tucked away. I personally in the Netherlands, others in Belgium and so on. And it's, Oleg and you are speaking with life experience, real life experience from Ukraine. And that is, powerful. I would like to open for questions and answers, these 5 minutes that I said before I pass the floor to Stephanie. So if there's a colleague that wishes to ask a question, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. Okay, we can have the discussion at the end. Thank you very much once again, Georgi, and thank you, Uber, for this. I would like to pass the floor to Stephanie, who has been co-moderating with me in Lisbon, where we had first this discussion, and today as well. And Stephanie Leonard is the head of government and regulatory affairs at TomTom. So Stephanie, floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, let me put this into full screen mode. And what time do you want to kick off the discussion, Johanna? Was it 11:15?
Yes, if possible.
Yeah. I'll make sure. Okay. Well, good morning to those of you, and just to echo the point that Jyrki had said, thank you for also attending. So we this is one of the reasons we wanted to have this this webinar, because of course we had it at the Congress in Lisbon in May. But we all felt this is a topic where if we could spread the information even further, then of course we have the tools nowadays to do that quite easily. So again, thank you for attending the webinar. I also see that Adam Hill is in the attendance. So of course, if there's any reporting on this in an ITS magazine in the future, that would be fantastic. But let me jump into my presentation, which is to put this more into the broader context of critical public emergencies and the role of real-time traffic information. And at the end, I will try and bring into the perspective of our experience as TomTom and at the beginning of the war in Ukraine. Let me just start with a very, very quick overview of what TomTom is. Hopefully most of you know what we are by now, but if not, we are a company that's on a mission to make the smartest and most useful map on the planet. So we have three core technologies that we create at the company. So that is highly accurate digital maps, navigation software, and real-time traffic information. So they're three separate technologies that can be used on their own, or they can be used all together, layered on top of each other. So that in a nutshell is a little bit about what TomTom is. I won't dwell too much more on that, so I can get to the heart of the topic. What I want to start with is just a bit of a kind of statement that at the moment we are living in an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous world. So that is kind of a term which is used a lot by political scientists and kind of people interested in geopolitics about right now. The world's very tense. You know, we have a lot of divisions from north to south, from east to west, in terms of digital, in terms of poverty, in terms of war, in terms of climate change, racial injustice. That it's right now, if you ask, young generations, they say that they are increasingly anxious right now because of the state of the world and the future that they see ahead of them. War, of course, is has always been a kind of a part of our history of the world, unfortunately. But right now, the world is very, very tense. Which brings the question, okay, well, what is the link with that and ITS? Well, in our opinion, there is a big overlap between that, especially with location technology. So all of those kind of geopolitical issues that we see is spreading into road infrastructure and mobility, as the previous two speakers have said. And in terms of how this links into public emergencies and large-scale emergencies. At TomTom, we have a dedicated team for live traffic emergency alerts. And when we had the session in Lisbon, I worked really closely with them preparing the presentation and getting a good understanding on what are the typical types of events that we normally deal with and what is our typical activity and how we respond. And the team, which we have based all across the world, so they're in all the different time zones, we're saying that the kind of typical scope of the kind of events that they respond to are things like wildfires, hurricanes and tornadoes, what they call winter closures, so if they have extreme snowfall, flooding. And they're the ones that when they told me, I said, okay, that's kind of that's a familiar topic, that's what I expected. But then they said that they also have to deal with active shootings and police activity, and then they have that kind of black triangle, which is the extraordinary emergencies. So this is where the invasion in Ukraine, for example, would fall under. And what they were explaining was that, when we find out that there is one of these events which can pose immediate risk to a fatality or for a large-scale accident, and you need to avoid people getting into that area, the typical response in terms of how we respond to these activities is we quickly close the affected roads in our navigation system. So we kind of discourage drivers from going there, and we warn them that they shouldn't be going. And then we try to, if they are in the car at the time, we of course need to quickly move them away from that area. So we try to, in our system, offer as quickly as possible a safe diversion route. And of course, in that context, if your driver is using navigation real-time traffic information, it really is a critical service in that moment in time. And you know, once a year we have a campaign called our Traffic Index, where we report them as congested cities in the world, and we have a kind of a report on the state of traffic and where mobility is going. And whenever we have this Traffic Index campaign, we always use the message, please use navigation real-time traffic information for all your trips. So even if it is the commute that you're doing every day and you know the route off the top of your head, please use navigation and traffic information, because you don't know what the conditions on the road are like on that day at that moment in time. So so that is, you know, a key in our opinion, it is a key service. But these are the two main activities that, at least from a navigation service provider, that's how we can help, basically, and our role basically in this kind of context. Now, in terms of where we have traffic information available, this is the current state of the countries where we operate in. And the reason why I want to show this slide is that we offer services in more than 80 countries around the world, and it's a huge number. But of course, there are parts of the world where we are not able to actually deploy our technology, and it's not because of you know, a lack of a business model or a lack of consumer demand. Unfortunately, it's mainly because of the geopolitical issues. So typically, the countries where we are grayed out at the moment are geopolitical. It's because of geopolitical issues why we're not able to have the services there, or it might be that the geopolitical situation is quite stable, but the tools to actually deliver the service are increasingly difficult. So in terms of being able to gather and harvest data, we would love for the whole map to be blue, but we do see that there are the geopolitical kind of tensions around the world does feed into our day-to-day operations as a location tech company. We have had, of course, experiences over the years on how the boundaries between one country and another about how to treat this, because in places like Europe, the borders are not really a sensitive issue, but there are some parts of the world where we offer traffic information where borders are a very sensitive issue in terms of how one country sees that border. For example, in Cyprus or, you know, in Israel. So we in those countries, we do have some experience of how you deal with those geopolitical issues. But as I come to at the end, the Ukraine invasion was something that was quite out of the ordinary that we'd had to experience with. Now, in terms of to look at some of these extreme public emergency events one by one, I don't want to overload you with statistics, but I want to go through and give you some insights in the data that we have seen, which is quite alarming in the sense that the rate of these events that are happening have really increased significantly in the past few years. So if we take wildfires, for example, on the screen you have a photo from Australia. So that's an very high aerial image. I think this was taken in the International Space Station of Australia, and literally the country was on fire in 2020. And at that time, there were some of the worst wildfires that had ever been seen. Now, we, of course, are collecting the data on the number of road closures that we are making because of wildfires. So that emergency alerts team, when they close a road, we have to indicate the cause of that road closure. So we have all in our data interesting statistics on the number of road closures because of a certain type of event. Now, in those really extreme wildfires, it was 17 times higher than in January from the same time the year before, in January 2019. And they made about 400 road closures in just under 7,000 kilometers. It was absolutely huge. And I was looking into the data to see, okay, was that a one-off year, or are we seeing anything increasing? And in 2020, around the world, we had about 2,000 road closures because of extreme wildfires. And then that went up to about 2,300 the year after. And then in 2022, it went down a little bit to 1,500. But compared to the 2019 figures, which were about just under 200, it was a huge increase, absolutely massive increase. And interestingly, it's not just wildfire, as we have seen over the summer. It's not just an issue in Australia. The countries where we have made the largest amounts of road closures because of the wildfires in the United States and Australia, they top the list, but there are a lot of countries also up in there. But of course, as we've seen, when I presented in Lisbon, I gave an example, I think in either Italy or Madrid, about, a huge wildfire that had literally taken place 2 days before the Congress session. And I updated this slide to show that, of course, we've had, one of the worst summers in Europe for wildfires. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with this. Greece was a country that really felt the burn. And they're saying now that the largest wildfire ever recorded in the EU happened in Greece this summer. I know, Johanna, you are Greek, and I don't know if you want to quickly say anything about how, the scale of this, that it was much larger than what had been experienced before. That's how I understand it.
No, it was, and it was burning for days, for more than a week. I think it was 2 weeks or more. It was impossible. Yeah. I cannot describe it. It's
Okay, now to go to another horrible extreme weather event is flooding. Okay, and same type of statistics. So on the picture you see on the right, that comes from Germany, where there were these horrible floods that happened in Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands in the summer of 2021, with catastrophic impact. I think in Germany there were about I think it was either 45 or 145 people that lost their lives. It was horrible. And in that summer, we made about 300 road closures because of the extreme flooding. And that was about 10 times higher than in the same period the year before. But very scary. Again, if you look at the number of road closures we had to make year on year, it was about 300 in 2019. Then the year after, it jumps to 1,300, and in 2022 it was 4,500. So the number of road closures we have to make because of flooding keeps increasing significantly year after year because the events are increasing. And interesting statistics, so the countries which are impacted the most by flood-related road closures are the United States and Europe. And again, an example of something that happened just last week. In Spain, happened in Madrid and Toledo, where they had horrible flooding that kind of happened quite rapidly. And what's very interesting, because I have family that live in Madrid, they told me that all of the citizens that day received an urgent SMS notification on their phone, which they had never used before. So the authorities in Madrid and the regional areas had an emergency alert system where they would send you an SMS. So, for example, in the Netherlands, they have this kind of test once a month, and everyone is they're familiar with this alert system. They know that it exists, and when the test happens once a month, it goes, okay, here is the alert. And when it's used, people are actually quite grateful for the service. I actually was at the TomTom headquarters in Amsterdam in July, and we had horrible weather storm, and they used the service. And it was interesting because I could see the colleagues getting the notification on the phone that was saying, stay home, do not go anywhere. And everyone was very trusting of the service, and there was not much confusion. It was just like, oh, okay, I need to stay home, or in this case, stay in the office and don't go anywhere. My family and friends that live in Madrid were telling me that because no one had ever seen or knew the service existed, it caused a lot of panic and confusion and anxiety because they'd never seen the service before, and suddenly everyone's getting this SMS, and they were saying, okay, is this a hack? Is this true? Can I trust it? And I heard some examples of people that were driving, getting these alerts, and that was causing, they said it was quite dangerous because they were getting these alerts and they weren't expecting it. So that I found, because I have this local knowledge, I wanted to share it with you. I thought that was quite interesting in how you're delivering to drivers and to citizens these messages to say, do not go anywhere, please stay at home. Another type of extreme weather event, of course, is to do with extreme snowfall. And when you see this picture for the first time, you kind of don't really understand the scale of it, but see how tall the car is, and then see how tall the snow is. Right, so that is, I don't know how many feet of snow that is, but that somewhere in the United States in January or February of this year, and they had record snowfalls. And again, like with wildfires and flooding, huge amounts of road closures related to snow than what we'd seen the year before. Since 2019, significant increase on the number of closures that we have to make because of snowfall, and they're not, every year it's not just doubling, it is, sometimes by 10 increasing. So this, of course, is another scary kind of trend. And then when I was comparing the data of, okay, flood-related road closures and snow and wildfire, we have a tool where you could actually put this on the map. And for example, in the US, there's only a handful of states where you're not really impacted by any of those weather events. If you're in California, you are really at risk from wildfires. If you're in Boston or Washington or New York and you're on the East Coast, you've got a huge risk of flooding. And then, of course, if you're in the kind of the Midwest in the US, you've got huge issues because of snow. So there's not many places in the US that are unaffected by this. And same as Europe. I mean, Italy is, and Austria and that kind of part, in Spain and the lower part of France, are all those three weather events are a potential risk there. And Japan as well. The whole country is completely covered. So what was also interesting that I saw in the data is that there were twice as many road closures for flooding than snow and wildfires. So that I thought was quite an interesting perspective. And then, of course, this is, the kind of weather-related ones. I wanted to also show some quick slide on the COVID lockdown from 2020, because we have some quite interesting statistics on that. And this broke all records that we had ever had on the number of road closures we had to make for a given event. And there were more than 37,000 COVID lockdown related road closures, more than 20,000 in Europe and more than 15,000 in North America. And this slide is also quite, infographic is also interesting. So you can see that the road closures, of course, would basically all of the borders between one country to the next. And you can also see in Europe where, where huge amounts of the road closures were. So Italy, for example, there are a huge amount of road closures there, and the south of France and Austria and all those kind of parts. So that was really, for me, quite a fascinating statistic. I wasn't aware of the scale of that and how the team had to handle the huge volume and the number of those events. And then another event, which is a horrible one, which is to do with school shootings in the United States. The team were telling me that for them they try to be emotionally detached when these events happen and they have to respond with them. And they said that unfortunately, because they are so common now, it becomes a bit a part of their day to day. And they say that it's extremely sad that is the case, but it's an increasingly a common type of incident that they have to deal with. Our response, of course, is exactly the same. You close the road, you cycle a route away from the area. I didn't feel like it was appropriate to throw statistics and stats on this particular topic, as I can sure you understand. But the feedback that the team gave me is that they know how to deal with these events now. They have the sources to be able to be notified about it, and the response that they use is basically the same. And now let's get on to Ukraine with the last kind of thematic slide I had before I come to some finding conclusions. When I asked the team about how it was like to deal with this, it was obvious that it was very emotional for them, that they had never done like anything like this before. The Europe team are based in Poland in the emergency alerts services. And, a lot of people that were based in Poland had family in Ukraine, so similar examples to Georgie of, having this personal connection with people living there and seeing how they can get them out. They kind of went into, at the beginning, a bit of an automated process, like, okay, let's close the roads entering into Ukraine so we can stop people kind of entering into this war-torn area. Of course, keeping the roads open for people wanting to leave, but coming in. So they kind of did the kind of normal bread and butter of the typical actions. But they quickly became aware that they needed to have a different response than what they're normally used to for the other emergency events. So on the picture on the left, you can see a photo of children and mothers watching a movie in a underground parking shelter. And this comes from a photographer that works for the New York Times. And we became quickly aware that a lot of people were hiding in parking garages. And of course, there were huge bottlenecks and traffic jams of people trying to flee the country. And for the first time ever, probably in TomTom's history, the traffic team realized that, okay, well, we have information on our map that could be used for war purposes. It could be used to target innocent civilians. And that is something they had never had to deal with before. So they quickly made a decision to deactivate the traffic visualization layers. So the map was basically as bare as possible, so people could still be able to use the navigation to find the way out. But location of parking garages, for example, were completely disactivated. So that wasn't present on the map, and you couldn't search for it in the map either. So that was all disactivated. So that they'd never done before, but they quickly realized this could be an option that could really help. And then in the days after, it became increasingly aware that the accuracy of our traffic service, we basically couldn't fulfill it anymore. So we didn't know if all the roads were actually there, if they were bombed or not, if there were soldiers on the roads or not. It became increasingly difficult to operate the service and to be able to offer a route recommendation to a driver when we do not know what is the situation on the road. So I think this was about 3 or 4 days after the immediate invasion, and more or less, or on the same day, all of the different service providers of Google Maps and the other service providers, we had to turn off the traffic and navigation service in the territory, purely because it was just impossible to keep it running, because we weren't able to actually know what was the situation on the road. So that was, I think, a horrible situation for the team to deal with, and we felt that, you know, the way we responded with the various kind of initial tools and then the deactivation layer and the turning off with the right steps to take. But it's another perspective of how, you know, an ITS stakeholder in this ecosystem had to respond to that. And then now, just to kind of close up, so we have a bit of time for any discussion or Q&A. What is obvious from all the statistics that I've dived into is that we're unfortunately going to see more and more of these critical public emergency events. You know, it wouldn't really follow the pattern and trend that suddenly all these extreme weather events stop happening, or if you know, these other geopolitical events are not happening anymore. I think it's very likely that this is going to continue. So if it is going to continue, how do we as a kind of ITS community basically address this? And we've been discussing, you know, okay, is there a smarter way and a more intelligent way where you can broadcast critical public emergency events for all the various different ITS stakeholders? So, for example, could we have some kind of central critical public emergency tool to broadcast these alerts? Within TISA, so the Travel Information Service Association, which I'm chairwoman for, we have a dedicated TPEG message for emergency alerts and warnings. Could we have a dedicated use of that, for example, by the authorities which are in charge of the emergency alerts? So like in Madrid, when everyone was getting that SMS message to say stay at home, could you have from the same authority that input received and then a TPEG equivalent message going out with that same content? Could we do something like that? And then maybe in a more detailed way, when thinking about safe diversion routes, so, you know, you're in the middle of a flood or a forest fire, the route that is suggested to move away from that could in the future that be based on some recommendation from the emergency authorities. You know, right now it's service providers that do this safe diversion route on their own, but could that be something done in a very quick, effective, collaborative way? So I think that, you know, I think the session at Lisbon has, of course, started getting some, you know, serious thinking going. At least in TISA, it's definitely a very important topic. But I think as a community and as an ecosystem, we will have to think of how we can coordinate these actions in a much more smarter, intelligent way, and what are going to be the right tools for that. So I'm sure a lot of you are a bit more anxious now than you were at the start of the presentation, and I apologize for that, but it is an important topic that I think we need to address head on. So
thank you, Stephanie. I think you should leave that slide there.
Okay.
Because you are taking this a step further, and that's brilliant. It's not, we're not here only to share the story and be emotionally charged like I am. Also thinking and adding to what you were saying, it's the war, but it's also the the natural or unnatural disasters. And as I said in the beginning, 4 days ago, we had this heavy rainfall. I think it was a storm called Daniel, and 15 people are dead, but so many, because it was an agricultural area and small
was
villages.
It in Greece?
In Greece, yes,
Yeah.
in Thessaly, in the central Greece. And it started raining, I think, at 3, 4 in the morning. So people living in the small villages are, most of them are older, so they cannot really move out. They were shocked. They didn't know what was happening with this message that is, by definition, super loud. Imagine this at 4 o'clock in the morning. And the rain that fell on one day, it was equal to the amount of rain that falls throughout the year or something like that. I don't have my data straight, but it shows you how unprepared we are, that we don't have what Pedro was mentioning in the beginning for this system that should be robust and flexible and with the information sharing. So this combination of a robust, resilient infrastructure in transport that is also combined with a physical, with a digital infrastructure that should one support the other and help people with evacuation routes, with safety in war as well. So I was impressed, Stephanie, because you were mentioning, I mean, we heard from the city of Kiev how they transformed the transport app into the life-saving tool at the end. And then Uber, how they facilitated the passage of people moving out of the cities that were under attack and providing help and so on, and how you realized immediately that what you had on your map, the positioning and the location of the parking spaces that were serving as shelters could really put the life of these people in danger instead of serving traffic, parking, and so on. So that is a really different perspective that TomTom brings in the story. I would open actually the floor for a bit of discussion. We have some time, 8 minutes. And we already have a hand by Adam Hill. Milica, can you unmute Adam, or can I? Who's doing that? Let's see.
I think now should be okay, Adam.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you, ERTICO, and for putting everything together and for hosting. I don't know if Oleg and Georgi are still with us, but I would say I've heard Oleg speak once before, quite early on in the war at a conference. Please keep coming to webinars and speaking at conferences, because I think the messages that you're putting out are just extraordinary. They're incredibly helpful for everyone else who's not directly affected to understand what is happening. So it really isn't time wasted to speak to communities like ours. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'm going to write something on this. The stories are so compelling, and we have covered Ukraine in my magazine ITS International before, because clearly there's so much happening that's important. Would it be possible, and we can connect afterwards perhaps, but just to share some of your slides in a more sort of high resolution way, so that we can actually reproduce them with credit to you, because I think some of the visuals that you've put up today are simply so useful in helping us to understand more about what you've been doing and what is going on. So that was my second plea. And the third was really, well, it was a question to Oleg, if he's still online, and really to ask whether or not you can foresee a time when you will be concerned about traffic cameras for the reasons of traffic enforcement, for example. In other words, can you foresee a time when ITS will not have to mean directing people to bomb shelters, and alerting of missile attacks, or is that simply too far in the future to think about?
Sorry, Adam, I didn't get the third question. So what's the question? I sent in the chat my email, so you can write me and I'll provide you all updated data, what we have for now for your article. No problem. Can you rephrase the third question?
Of course. Sure. Thank you, Oleg. Can you foresee, it must be incredibly difficult because you're in the middle of this terrible situation. Can you foresee a time when ITS will mean traffic management in peacetime? Is that something that you can even think about at the moment?
Of course, as I mentioned, the population of Kiev now almost reached the before war time. So we have to think about it because the logistic in the city now even more important because it's Kiev situated on the transportation road, which is very important for eastern part where the military operates now.
Sure. So there is a practical. I'm pleased to hear it. Thank you. That's very useful. And again, thank you to everyone who shared their stories today, because I think it's given me a tremendous understanding of the ways in which ITS is being repurposed at various parts of the ecosystem. So thank you very much for this. It's been incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion points? We have, like 3 minutes, but maybe there's a question out there. Okay.
Just a comment, Johanna. I think we can maybe discuss about how to keep this kind of topic a regular theme, maybe at the ITS Congress, and to keep the top of the agenda very high. And of course, the next Congress is is in Dubai, the ITS World Congress. So it's the European one, but of course it's the world version. I mean, it would be great to have to think about how we can approach this topic in Dubai and have the session again, maybe not with the exact same scope and with the same speakers, but just to keep this this type of theme going. And it would be great if we can do it again in Dubai.
Absolutely, I fully agree. And I asked you to keep the slide there because I really like this idea with the TISA TPEG, emergency alert warning, or type of you know, this kind of message. It is very important. These evacuation routes for all sorts of extraordinary situations is something that we should all be looking at and working on. Apart from also building infrastructure that is actually resilient. That's something that the European Commission is looking into for years. But now we have to do more. With regards to the information sharing as well.
Because I think I've been reading a lot of articles the past few weeks which have talked about how a lot of authorities are realizing that, okay, if we were to have, you know, this extreme flood or wildfire in our kind of city or region, are we prepared enough? And the general trend that I'm reading is that no, and the questions are now like, okay, well, what type of system do we need to set up? So if this is now going to be, you know, thought about and really acted upon, now is the right time to make sure they don't forget the ITS part. Because I also understand that the authorities, which are the ones which broadcast these, the critical public emergency routes, are not the traditional road operator, road authority. It's a different organization. It's a different stakeholder community. That's not really an ITS. So we need to find a way to bring them in and for them to realize, okay, the ITS angle of this is super important and not to overlook it.
Absolutely. Yes. Okay. We will work on that. We promise. All right. So I want to thank everyone, all the panelists, the excellent exchange of experience and information and feeding to each other's willingness to work on this. Also, I want to thank other participants, not many, but still. And we promise that we will come back, not only in the Congress, but also online and also with articles on this very important and powerful discussion. So thank you very much to Pedro, who is not here because he had to leave, to Oleg from the city of Kiev, to Georgi from Uber, and Stephanie Leonard from TomTom. I thank you and I wish you a good day, and let's be strong and keep it up. Yeah.
Thank you, Johanna.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.